an Oscar for total restraint.
Oh boy. Oh boy.
A meme for total chaos.
What is it? What is it? Oh no, not the beast! Not the beast! Ah! Open my eyes! Eyes!
And a live cockroach eaten on camera. All three belong to Nicolas Cage, and by the end of this trial, you'll know whether that's range, recklessness, or something stranger. Here's the case against him, and it's a real one. For decades, Nicolas Cage has been a punchline, a face pulled from screaming compilations, a shorthand for an actor who chews through every scene he's in. There's the bug-eyed rage in Face Off. There's the meltdown in the Wicker Man remake, still quoted 2 decades later. Strip either scene down to one screaming frame, no story, no character, and of course it looks ridiculous. Almost anyone's biggest moment does in isolation. But the reputation isn't just a joke. It shaped his actual career. By the 2010s, Cage was reportedly working through serious financial debt. He has said he overinvested in real estate before the market crashed, leaving him with creditors, tax problems, and millions to repay. He took film after film to pay it down. A long run of those titles skipped theaters entirely and went straight to streaming or video on demand. Critics mocked the pace, sometimes turning another Nicolas Cage movie into its own punchline. But Cage has been direct about one thing. Even on the smallest, cheapest productions, he says he never phoned it in. By his own account, years later, he'd finally settled the debt completely.
During that period of time, when these critics say like, he's just here for a paycheck and he's phoning it in.
Even if the movie ultimately is crummy, they know I'm not phoning it in.
That's a harder story than he became a meme. He kept showing up fully for movies nobody expected to matter because the work itself was paying real bills. Here's what the accusation never quite explains, though. It assumes Cage can't turn the volume down. That loud is the default, and quiet is the exception. One movie proves that assumption wrong all by itself. It lets us watch Cage change acting styles inside the same film, sometimes the same shot.
I'm insane. I'm Ouroboros.
I don't know what that word means.
I've written myself into my screenplay. That's kind of weird, huh?
We'll get there. But before we call any of this bad acting, we have to define the crime. Overacting isn't just acting that's loud. Overacting is a performance whose scale doesn't match the world it's living inside. Here's the clearest example. In Con Air, Cage plays a wrongly convicted ex-soldier trapped on a hijacked prison plane. The whole movie is already running at full volume, explosions, one-liners, a plane crashing through Las Vegas. Cage matches that energy scene after scene.
I said, put the bunny back in the box.
A quiet, internal performance would have broken that film completely. Matching the movie's own scale isn't a flaw. It's the job. Face Off works the same way. Director John Woo builds movies at the volume of grand opera, doves included. Underplaying that role would have been the actual mistake. And in 2009's Bad Lieutenant, Cage plays a corrupt, drug-addicted detective who hallucinates iguanas. The performance works because Cage isn't the only strange thing in the movie. The entire film is hallucinating right alongside him. But volume alone doesn't create fit. A scream can still be wrong inside a loud movie. The emotion, the timing, and the actors standing next to Cage all have to agree with the choice, or the scale collapses anyway. The real test, then, isn't whether Cage looks natural. It's whether the choice reveals the character, or simply calls attention to the actor making it instead.
Put the bunny back in the box.
No, not the beast! Not the beast! Ah! Open my eyes!
Think of acting scale less like a switch, on or off, and more like a dial. Every film sets its own volume. A whisper in a horror movie can feel enormous. A scream in the same movie can feel completely earned. It depends entirely on what the film around it has already established. Most actors turn that dial cautiously, staying safe in the middle. Cage is one of the few willing to turn it all the way in either direction and trust the film to meet him there.
And I bake bread, and I sweat. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I.
That dial explains his biggest performances. But one famous scene shows exactly where the theory can break. We'll get to that too. Cage even has his own name for this whole approach. It sounds a little ridiculous. The idea behind it isn't. We'll get to that too. Context can excuse a loud performance. It can't prove Cage is actually in control of it. For that, we need to watch him change gears. Once you watch his filmography through that lens, a pattern shows up. Cage isn't one actor with one setting. He works in at least 3 distinct modes, and he picks them on purpose. The first is quiet realism. Emotion stays buried on purpose here. In Leaving Las Vegas, Cage plays an alcoholic writer drinking himself to death. He doesn't perform his own destruction, he just commits to it, quietly, and lets the tragedy speak for itself. It's the performance that won him the Oscar, built largely on restraint.
I'm sorry, sir. Is there a problem?
Watch what quiet realism looks like up close in Pig. Rob sits across from a chef who once worked for him, a man who abandoned the pub he actually wanted to run for a restaurant built to impress critics. Rob barely raises his voice through the entire confrontation.
Derek, who has my pig?
His pace never speeds up. He barely lets the anger reach his face. And that stillness is exactly what makes the scene unbearable to watch. The chef is the one who starts sweating, stammering, filling every silence Rob leaves open. If Rob had shouted, he would have looked desperate. By staying still, he looks like the only person in the room who still knows exactly who he is. Shouting would have weakened him. Silence is what gives him the authority. The second is heightened performance. Bigger than real life, but still emotionally true. Take Ronnie Camerari's first big scene in Moonstruck. Cage plays a baker consumed by a 5-year grudge against his own brother, and when he finally explains it, he doesn't just get angry. He gets almost musical about it. His voice rising and falling like an aria. His whole body swinging between fury and heartbreak in the same breath.
And I bake bread, and I sweat and shovel this stinking dough in and out of this hot hole in the wall, and I should be so happy. Huh, sweetie?
It sounds like too much for a kitchen argument, but Moonstruck is a romantic comedy built on operatic Italian-American family drama, a world where big feelings are the whole point. The specific wound underneath the volume never changes. A man who lost his hand, then watched his engagement collapse and spent 5 years blaming his brother. The performance is loud. The grief inside it stays exact. Wild at Heart lives in this same heightened mode, an Elvis-inspired drifter turned up past naturalism in a film that won the 1990 Palme d'Or at Cannes. In 2010's Kick-Ass, Cage played Big Daddy in a strange, clipped voice. He said the choice was a direct homage to Adam West's 1960s Batman, a performance he grew up idolizing.
Don't take it personal, though. We don't trust anybody.
I rerouted your IP address. Finding you was way too easy.
The third is full expressionism. This is the mode people actually mean when they say overacting. In Vampire's Kiss, Cage plays a man convinced he's turning into a vampire. At one point, he eats a live cockroach on camera. He's since said he did it twice, because the director filmed a second take just to prank him. It's the most extreme choice imaginable, in service of a mind completely coming apart.
A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S,
T-U-B-W-X-Y-Z's! Huh?
Longlegs in 2024 works the same way, a demon-worshipping serial killer played through a pale, warped, almost inhuman physicality.
And then when house number 8 was so white, whiter than a fish's throat, whiter than tits, I knew then that the work we were doing was immaculate.
3 modes, 3 completely different tools. But knowing they exist isn't proof Cage actually controls the switch between them. For that, we need laboratory conditions. One film gives us exactly that. Comparing 2 different movies always changes too many variables at once. Different director, different genre, different year, different everything surrounding the actor. That's a contrast. It isn't proof of control. Adaptation is proof of control. Same film, same director, same visual world, sometimes the same shot. Cage plays twin brothers, Charlie and Donald Kaufman, and builds 2 completely different people out of nothing but technique.
Thanks. I also want to thank you for your idea. It was very helpful. I changed it a little. Now the killer cuts off body pieces and...
Watch how differently they occupy a room. Charlie hunches, takes up as little space as possible, eyes dropping to the floor whenever a conversation turns difficult. Donald sits forward, holds eye contact a beat too long, and finishes every sentence like he already knows you'll agree with him. Even the way they enter a scene is different. Charlie edges into a room like he's checking for an exit first. Donald walks in like the room was already expecting him.
I finished my script. I'm done. Hey, thanks a lot, buddy. Cool. Okay, there's a serial killer, right?
The distinction remains clear even when the brothers share a scene. On stage, larger gestures could establish that same difference across a whole theater. In close-up, Cage has to separate the brothers through details the camera can catch from inches away, and it still reads 2 different people. But technique alone doesn't explain why the brothers feel human instead of just visually distinct. The deeper difference is what each one expects from the world. Charlie talks about his work as though he's already defending a failure. Donald talks about his screenplay as though success is only a matter of finishing it.
Cool. Okay, there's a serial killer, right? Well, no, wait. And he's being hunted by a cop, and he's taunting the cop, right? Sending clues who his next victim is.
Charlie apologizes for wanting something difficult. Donald never considers that his simpler idea might need an apology. That's not posture. That's a completely different relationship to failure, built into how each brother carries himself before he's said a single word. Now put that same instrument next to the outer edges of the dial. We already watched Rob's stillness in Pig, one man refusing to raise his voice even while gutted by grief. Set that next to Vampire's Kiss, where the volume goes the opposite direction entirely. Screaming, cockroaches, a man reciting the alphabet like language itself is failing him. There's no version of Rob Feld inside that alphabet scene, and no version of that alphabet scene inside Rob Feld. And yet, both choices come from the same actor, applying the same total belief to opposite ends of the same instrument. The material changed. Cage changed with it.
A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K.
But control and judgment aren't the same thing. That proves he can control the dial. It doesn't prove he always picks the right setting, and knowing when he doesn't is the whole point of what comes next. A real trial needs a moment where the defense stops making excuses.
Stay back!
And now the game is over.
Take the unrated cut of The Wicker Man from 2006. Near the end, Cage's character is restrained while bees are poured over his face. He screams the line that made him a meme for the next 2 decades.
What is that? What is that? What is it? Oh, no, not the bees! Not the bees! Ah!
What did the character want in that moment? Simple, to survive and to save the child he'd been searching for all film. What's the tone the movie had built around him up to that point? Unclear, it's a horror film that's already unsure whether it's playing its own premise straight, drifting between straight-faced dread and unintentional comedy for most of its runtime. The actors around Cage in that final sequence are still delivering fairly grounded, serious performances, which only makes the mismatch louder. Cage's choice, screaming at a volume the rest of the film never once reaches, doesn't clarify the character in that moment. It replaces him. For a few seconds, you're not watching a desperate father in danger. You're watching Nicolas Cage doing a bit, and the movie around him has no idea how to catch up. That's the exact failure state the whole theory predicts: full expressionism, dropped into a film that never built a world big enough to hold it. That distinction matters because control and judgment are separate skills. Cage may know exactly how large a choice is. The harder question is whether the scene can survive it. A restrained mistake often disappears inside a forgettable movie. Cage's mistakes do the opposite. They become immortal. They get clipped, remixed, and detached from the story until the failed moment becomes more famous than the character. That creates a strange bias in how audiences remember him. His quiet successes remain inside their films.
You like cooking it?
Absolutely.
His loud failures escape them. You have to watch the performances to see the imbalance. The memes preserve the moments when the gamble collapsed, but rarely the scenes where the same appetite for risk created something precise. That's why one bad scream can define a career more easily than 10 controlled silences can repair it. Longlegs creates a more interesting disagreement, because this time it isn't about whether Cage committed. It's about whether the film could hold what he committed to. Some reviewers described his performance as genuinely nightmarish, the warped center the entire movie orbits around. Others argued that his singing, makeup, and exaggerated voice punctured the dread the film worked so carefully to build.
The day you decided to go into law enforcement, you were 20. We had such a big laugh about it.
Nobody in that argument is accusing Cage of holding back. The disagreement is about fit, not effort. Did the film construct a world large enough to contain him, or did Cage, for a few scenes, briefly become larger than the film itself? That's a genuinely unresolved question, and it's the most honest place this trial can leave it. His failures finally show us where fearless acting turns into bad acting, the exact moment the performance stops serving the character and starts serving itself. Here's the verdict. Cage's excess isn't automatically brilliant. It becomes brilliant when three things line up. First, the emotion has to be specific. Not generic anger or generic grief, but one particular feeling. Ronnie's rage in Moonstruck was never just anger. It was grief for his hand, his broken engagement, and 5 years spent feeding the same wound. Second, the film has to be playing by the same rules as the performance. It has to be built for the same volume it's asking him to reach. Con Air and Face Off were already shouting before Cage ever opened his mouth. Third, Cage has to commit completely, without ever winking at the camera to say he's above the material.
But love don't make things nice. It ruins everything.
Put the bunny back in the box.
Insane? I'm Earl Bros.
When those three line up, you get Leaving Las Vegas, you get Pig, you get Adaptation, and both brothers inside it. When even one condition goes missing, you get the Bees. Cage calls his whole approach nouveau shamanic.
An acting discipline that you've referred to as nouveau shamanic, is that correct?
Yeah.
What are the core principles?
I've been told that all actors really hail from the early medicine men and the shamans.
Strange name. Simple goal underneath it: push the imagination far enough that even an artificial choice still feels completely believed. The role stops feeling like acting. It starts feeling like belief, whether that belief comes out as a scream or a silence. Most actors avoid choices that might make them look foolish. Cage doesn't. Sometimes that risk produces a scene people mock for 20 years. Sometimes it produces an Oscar.
And the Oscar is awarded to Nicolas Cage.
The courage behind both is the same. You don't reach the unforgettable without risking the ridiculous. It can look unreal, and still feel completely true. Cage risked the ridiculous to reach the unforgettable. Not every actor is built for that trade. Fiennes went the other way entirely, and it's just as fascinating to pull apart. Subscribe if you want more careers taken apart like this one.